Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Grischuk has just played d takes e5 and Svidler answered with f takes e5, and this doesn't actually gain a tempo on the knight immediately because Grischuk played bishop g4 attacking the white queen, and this is where the game got really interesting because Svidler now played e takes f6 as if the game hadn't got sharp enough already, with Grischuk sacrificing a piece in the opening. The engines didn't like this move, labelling it as a blunder, as white had a clear advantage after queen a4. The threat of d4 is not going to win the piece back because the f6 knight is hanging, but this is pretty much black's only move here. D4 is pretty much the only move. And after e takes f6, queen takes f6, knight e4, white is ahead, but accurate play is required. Perhaps Svidler feared this line, as it was likely Grischuk had analysed it in depth, and so he elected for a less sound but insanely complicated and imbalanced alternative with e takes f6. So Grischuk gladly snapped up the queen with bishop takes d1. So f takes g7 is forced. This is the only way that white can continue, and although he is definitely better here with what will be 3 pieces against the queen after the smoke clears, the queen a4 lines gave white a much bigger advantage. Black must now play king takes g7, and Svidler played the correct move because the threat of d4 still exists. So he plays bishop takes c5. Playing instead king takes d1 or rook takes d1 allows d4, and black is suddenly winning after king c2, d takes c3, b takes c3, rook b8 attacking the bishop. Now after, say for example, a4, queen e7, threatening queen e4 check is very strong for black. If queen e4, bishop e4, then queen b7. So looking good in conjunction with a6. So Svidler played bishop takes c5, so d4 is not going to win a piece now. And Grischuk continued with h3, which unveils the threat of queen h4 check, and if g takes f3, then bishop f3 attacking the rook is good for black. However, the engines also didn't like this move, giving instead bishop h5, holding on to the piece and retaining a small edge of about 0.8. Black doesn't need to be worried about bishop takes f8 here in any lines, and on the contrary would be happy to see it, as he doesn't have to worry about his dark squares so much anymore. This dark square bishop is a very powerful piece given the position. Best play here continues bishop d4 check, and this may be why Grischuk didn't want to play bishop h5 to allow this. Now f6, and you know, it's a very complex game to come. White has 3 pieces against the queen, but he still isn't castled, and black is a pawn up, but white can probably win this pawn here on d5 just by aiming his minor pieces at him. Both sides have pawn majorities, white on the queen side with 2-1, black on the king side with 3-2, and it's pretty unclear how either side should continue, but it's bound to be a rich and interesting game. Okay, so back to the game continuation. Grischuk played h3, and Svidler played rook takes d1, which again was the most accurate move he could have played. If instead knight takes d1, h takes g2, bishop takes f8 check, queen takes f8, in this line this is a good idea, and it's the best that white can do, but black is still better. Rook g1 is forced, and now white loses a piece after queen b1 check. It's picking up the bishop. King f2, g takes f1 queen. If instead queen takes b5, white is objectively okay after knight g3, but It's a tough position to play. Black has pressure on b2. The d5 pawn is ominous, and white will have to lose a move capturing on g2 at some point. So g takes f1, queen check, bishop takes f1, saves the bishop, but now comes rook e8 with the black pieces converging on e1, and black gains a decisive penetration after king g2. It's pretty much forced. If instead say knight e3, simply queen f4 check is going to pick off the knight. So king g2 and now rook e1, and the tactical power of the queen becomes apparent. White is virtually unable to move any of his pieces, and queen d4 is coming next, exploiting this pin, the rooks and the knight in between them. And you know, black's winning. Say for example king h1, simply queen d4, and there's nothing white can do. So it was good for Svidler. He missed that line. He played instead of rook takes d1. And you know, it's a gutsy choice, this whole continuation, because this king is going to be stranded in the center whatever happens now. It's got no chance of castling after h takes g2, and this is the only move that's consistent with black's previous play. He's going to be winning back one piece, and you know, it's his best option now, although this line is not as promising as the line we saw before with bishop h5. White now has a considerable edge over a pawn. So his response here is forced, rook g1. Again, if instead bishop takes f8, white's advantage is lessened. After queen takes f8, rook g1, g takes f1 queen, rook takes f1, queen e7 check, bishop e2, and for example rook b8 attacking b2. So rook d2, now d4, rook takes d4, rook takes b2, and black has pressure, but white is still better. So rook g1, g takes f1 queen, king takes f1, and to his credit, Svidler is finding all of the best moves and retaining his edge of about a pawn. As before, we have 3 pieces against a pawn and queen. Materially, this favors black, but dynamically, white is better, as 3 minor pieces can create a lot more threats than one queen. It took real guts to play this line from Svidler, because as I said, he's abandoned his castling rights. And this is the kind of imbalance that I personally love in chess games, although there's no way I would take such a risk with my king still uncastled. It's essential that the queen has targets to attack and threats to make, and Grischuk's play has certainly enabled that. Here he played queen h4, immediately attacking h2, and again willing to give up an exchange, allowing bishop takes f8. And Svidler answered with rook g2 to defend the pawn, and you know, not wanting to give up his dark square bishop. We can have a look. If instead bishop takes f8, rook takes f8, now rook takes d5, but now comes queen takes h2, the pawn falls, and although black gives up the exchange, the positional balance remains approximately level. So rook g2, now rook f d8. The option to win the exchange is gone. And positions like these give rise to many traps. This is a nasty one set by Grischuk, and Svidler did not accept the offered pawn on d5 here, instead gaining a tempo on the queen with rook d4 supported by the bishop. If instead rook takes d5, black is doing well. After rook takes d5, knight takes d5, and now a nasty move. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Rook c8, and suddenly black is winning. Playing against the queen it's very unwise to have any loose pieces, and white has 3 of them here. He can't move the bishop, or rook c1, will be mating with the queen here on h4, and his best hope is b4. If instead bishop e3, defending c1, now queen e4. It's attacking the knight, which is supporting the bishop. So b4 would be better, but now rook takes c5, with the idea that after b takes c5, queen d4, white is losing a piece tactically. He has to move his knight, after which the queen can force the win of a piece. For example, if knight e7, queen a1 check, king f2, now queen f6 checks, picks up the knight. Suffice to say, black is winning in all lines. Okay, that's the end of part 2.